Hello and welcome to the demonstration video for the black charcoal layer of the eye and the neck for our outside the box charcoal face practice. Now today we are going to be working with black and white. Charcoal pencils. We'll need both to add in the highlights and details after we've gone through. And then we also will need a blending stump, perhaps a sharpener, perhaps a scrap piece of paper to clean your blending stump off on, or one of these sanding tools would be great too. Now we are going to be following along with the steps that you can see in our lesson guide for this project. We'll begin with layer 1, where we come in and add our solid black layer with our charcoal pencil. Layer 2 is coming through with our blending stump, and then layer 3 is coming in with our white charcoal pencil to come in with highlights and texture. So we are going to begin with step 1, where we come in to add in the black for our layering on our eye. And the first step I'd like for you to begin with is to take your reference photo, and we're gonna create a crease just right outside the eyelashes of the eye on this image. So let's fold that, and we're gonna place it as close as we can get it to the eye that we're actually drawing. That is one of the most helpful tips I have for you. Now let's go ahead and start by adding our solid black line just right along the edge here, and we're gonna also curl around and get just a little part of the tear duct in that space. We are also going to outline the iris, the colorful part of the eye. So we're gonna give ourselves just a nice little outline here, and I like to twist my pencil so that I can find the crispy part. Charcoal goes dull quite quickly, so you always have to kind of be turning your pencil to find where the point is, but you guys get the point. Now, we are continuing by taking this black line along that top edge where we see the lash line kind of come out, but we are also going to add a solid black layer, just like a triangle essentially, in that corner of the eye here. So we're going to come through and add just that little triangle shape, and I'm also going to bring some of that charcoal down and around, filling that like center space. And I'm not going to go too far because we'll use our blending stump to help with that, but I did bring that down around to kind of wrap around the under eye. We also need to fill our pupil with solid black, and I'm leaving the highlight empty. I want to make sure I don't go into the highlight because then it won't be as bright of a white when we come in to fill it. And we want the pupil to touch the top. So blow away your dust. Check and see that your pupil is filling with an even gap around the pupil to the iris. So the space between the pupil and iris should be even all the way around, and then it should go up and touch the top of the eyelid here. Next, I'm gonna find a good crispy point, and I'm gonna very carefully trace the eyelid, and I'm also gonna add in that little line that goes behind it. Just a hint there. Now that's where we'll start. We'll most likely need to add in more black as we go. But let's go ahead and begin with our blending stump. And I like to work from the top down, especially if it's lighter above. So I'm gonna come in with my blending stump, and I did have a little bit left over on my blending stump, so I'm using it to just kind of fill in some gray. Now, if you don't have enough on your blending stump, you could steal from like the corner of our eye that we just added value to. We could also bring in some value from the side here, and we're basically trying to surround the highlight on the brow bone here. So we want to be careful here that we don't go into the white too much with our black charcoal, because when we mix our black and white charcoal, that is when we get an unusual color that's like a weird blue that is not lovely. So I want you to try to like leave a gap of paper between your black and your white charcoal as you're working. Now we're just kind of bringing that up and around. We have a little bit of a highlight through this space, so I am not gonna fill the gray there, but I am going to just soften the line that I created for the eyelid. Now let's do that for our second eyelid line. I'm just going right along it, just continuously passing over it to help smooth out the grains. We want to be careful not to increase the thickness by too much. Now let's come in with our blending stump, and if you have a lot on your blending stump, just take a scrap part of your paper and twist it around to clean it off. Now we're gonna continue by looking at the eyelid, and we've got like a little bit of gray on the inside, but we want to leave that highlight right next to the tear duct here. Now let's go into that tear duct, and we're just gonna soften the line and kind of fill that space with a bit of medium and lift that line up, almost like a little U shape underneath there. We're also going to go along the bottom tear line, and I'm just adding in a small amount of gray on the left-hand side here. You can take a look and see if you are following along accurately. All right. Now let's go along this lid line, and we're just gonna trace along that line just a couple times, just going right along it, and that's gonna give us this perfect little shadow. Now let's do that in this space as well. I'm gonna start not by touching the black, but by just coming into that shadow space and helping this to fade out to just that little pop of white that we've got. I'm gonna fill the rest with gray and just bring it right up to the edge so that we've got both of the whites of the eye taken care of. Now let's go on the right side of the lid, and I'm just gonna add a small amount of gray to the side. Be careful not to touch the lashes too much. And that should kind of help us to isolate the highlight that is directly above the iris here. Now let's go in and we'll soften the lines around the iris. So let's just go around those lines, just passing once, twice. And then let's pass around the the pupil once, twice, just softening it. And then from above, once, twice. And we're kind of like bringing that value down to create this little U of value that we see through here. So I'm just gonna come through and add just a little bit of the gray through here. But our goal as we're working on this eye is to capture the highlight that is basically like a U shape underneath the pupil. Now let's go along the lid line along the top, and we're just softening that as well. We're gonna bring this value down into the white of the eye now. So let's take this the black, and fade it out into the gray just by barely touching and tapping. Keep that end nice and light, so don't go over the end too much now that we've got black on our blending stump. All right, now we're gonna come out and kind of enforce the shape of the lash. So we're just bringing that out in a light way. We're not making it super solid black. And I am going to clean my blending stump off because I just touched solid black. So whenever I start to get too much on my blending stump and then I'm moving into a lighter area, that is when I choose to clean my blending stump. So that's how you know when you need to do that. So let's go underneath the eye now. I've just cleaned my blending stump so I know it's not too light. I'm placing my picture as close to this image as I can, and I'm looking back and forth between them to make sure that I am matching the image that I'm trying to draw as much as I can. So I'm gonna go through, I'm looking back and forth. So it's kind of like an eye flutter. We're like really paying attention to the details we see in the reference photo so we can make our drawing look realistic. That's how that happens. It doesn't come from your memory, it comes from observing by actually looking back and forth. I'm gonna bring that up so it's almost touching that lid line here. Gonna fade that out so it's nice and softly transitioning out into the cheek. All right, now at this point, I would like to just double check with my black layer because we always want to perfect our black before we come in for our layer 3 of adding our white charcoal. So I'm gonna come through, and at this point I might like reinforce a couple lines. So I might bring in that little line behind the lid. I kind of lost it a bit. So I just reapplied it, blending it out just a little bit more. And maybe I'll come in, I think I could probably do a little bit more underneath the eye right here. So we're just really perfecting and trying to get that transition nice and neat. We want to have this matching our photo as much as possible before we continue on. All right, now at this point, we are going to switch into working with white. We'll come back with black, so it's okay if you're not quite there. Now we're gonna continue by adding, I like to think of shapes as I'm drawing to help me. So I look at this little highlight in the eye and I see a W. So I made a little white W, and then I'm gonna come in with my black and just kind of isolate that W. Add a little bit more detail to it. We've got like a dot in there. We've got like a couple little curves. Okay, so looking at this, I think I'm gonna touch those little ends of the W to make them not quite so tall because we want it to match our reference. So let's compare those shapes and see if we're getting there. Getting closer and closer. Okay. Now at this point, we are gonna use our white to come through, and we're going to add a highlight on the tear duct. So I'm gonna add like 3 little dots, and I wanna find a good point. So 1, 2, and tiny one, 3, and then 1 little highlight on the inside of this tear duct right here. Okay, now we're gonna come in and I'm gonna add some little dots and like bring this little line up. So see how this tear line is going directly underneath this section. So we're just coming through and adding that. I might also add just like this little bit of white, like right at the bottom of that tear line to really make that stand out. I might come back through and just lighten the left side here. Just a little bit of overlap. All right, now let's do our squinting check. We're gonna squint our eyes. Ooh, and I have a lot of value that's too light over here. So I'm gonna come in and just shade that out a bit. And I did not notice that until I squinted, and it's just so interesting how sometimes you don't notice that something is off until you're only looking at the values. That's what I'm doing, is I'm blending all the details so that my lashes like cover the detail part. So what I'm focused on is seeing if my values match or not. And that is so helpful as you're drawing faces. So I'm just perfecting my black layer here. And I wanna like take a look at it as a whole. So I kind of scooched my picture out so I can continue on the bridge of the nose here. All right, fading that out. Now I think I'm pretty close to being ready for our last step. So I am just gonna double check and make sure I've got everything accurate. And then our last step, for the eye specifically, we are gonna come in and we're sharpening on the left-hand side, and I highly recommend getting a nice crispy point for the lashes. Oops, sometimes your pencil may break, and I guess I should point out how you can fix this. You can remove the lid, and first you could just like push down with a fingernail if you can reach it, but sometimes you do need a paper clip to just pop that lead out of there. So once you get the lead out, you can put the pencil sharpener back together, and then just slowly turning it is all you have to do to get that to continue sharpening. All right, now, oops, I am going to come in with my sharp pencil, and I want to say that oftentimes students try to draw lashes like this, or even worse, the SpongeBob lashes, like perfectly straight. What we're doing here is not that. We are going to pick the center lash line. So we're gonna go right above our highlight here, and here is one very straight, skinny little line, and I'm gonna find a sharp part of my charcoal and I'm gonna lift up, and I'm making the skinniest, lightest, crispest line. I don't know if that's the right way to say that. The crispiest line I can make. All right, now there's our straight line right above the highlight. Now over here, let's put our charcoal at the end of the iris, and we're gonna curve that going out. Okay, so that's going out this direction. Now let's go to the other edge of the iris, right here, and we're gonna follow this lash shape. So that's going this direction and kind of coming up past that the lid line here. Now, as we reach the edge of the lid line right here, I'm gonna add in just one kind of curving out towards that edge. There we go. Oops, that was kind of thick. And then, of course, we've got these little curlers right at the edge here that are just lifting up. All right. Give you a second to kind of get those laid out. I'm gonna sharpen mine just one more time. Ooh, yeah, look at that point. Woohoo. All right, now I'm gonna come through and I'm gonna put my finger right on these lashes, and they only come out just a smidge past the iris. So I'm gonna add one, and I've got like a little and a little. Okay, now I'm to just like right above the highlight, like on the first part that it's touching, it has a curler that kind of comes out like this. And then we've got a couple little ones in between. I'm just making just a couple little lines here, just very, very faintly. They do not need to be very dark for this part. So we're just making just the impression of lashes going and filling the spaces that we've already created. Now I'm working on this tall lash, and this one reaches up past the lid line. So I'm making sure that I'm adding specific lashes that I see. I'm not just like starting to go crazy. Remember, when we're trying to make something look like a specific image, you cannot rely on memory. It is incorrect. So don't do that. And now I'm gonna go through and do one little thing at the bottom of the lashes, that black line. I'm just making some little like short upward motions, like little tiny itty bitty short lines. That's kind of like implying the start of lashes. Even though I didn't actually continue those lines, it looks like that's the beginning of them. Now we're gonna take our blending stump, clean that off so we don't have too much value. And if you've got any that are a smidge crispy, you can just barely graze over the top of them. We don't wanna go too much because it'll thicken those lines. We wanna keep them nice and skinny. And then for this last little curl, I'm just bringing in a couple lines here, and they kind of meet all together as a triangle. Let's compare. All right, that's looking pretty good. Now, let's come down to the bottom for our lower lash line. First, I would like for you to just really make sure that the line where the iris is touching is slightly flat, because it is not completely round along the bottom here. It touches that lid line, which shows that she's not like surprised. When your lid is not touching your iris, somehow that shows like a different emotion. So we have to be careful with that. So we're making that a nice flat little line here. Now we are going to come in and let's add our first lash. The one that I see as being our first one is right directly underneath the highlight. So let's add just this little bloop. And notice that it starts right at the dark edge, not the light edge. So we're gonna come in and we're just adding a couple, and let's add the outside edge one now. So the last lash that I see comes out at a curve like this. And then the one that's like right in the middle is right directly beneath the pupil and just kind of like comes out from that dark. So remember, we're going past that light section, that little strip, and we're looking for specific lashes that you can go in and add. Don't go too dark. We're pressing very lightly here. It's like just a shadow trail essentially. Now we're just slowly adding in these lashes. And might just darken that space up a bit. Here we go, kind of bringing that out. And I am also going to use this chance to just very lightly add a couple of these little lines directly underneath the eye. And then I'm going to come in with a blending stump. So take a look where we're at now. I'm going to come in with my blending stump and just so carefully soften these lines. All right, at this point, we are gonna come back through with our white, and let's go in and add a little bit of texture in the eye. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm just like adding some lines, almost like a sun ray coming out from the iris, all kind of like leading back towards the pupil, just directly underneath the pupil. And we don't wanna do too much because we wanna leave some gray showing through, but you can go in with your blending stump and kind of like touch through it if you want to lighten it up a bit. Okay, now I'm gonna just tap with my blending stump just to kind of get that texture to not be quite so strong. And I think I might come in with my black. I think that highlight is a bit too large on mine. Okay, now let's put your eye picture right next to your eye drawing. And we're gonna look back and forth and see if there's anything that we can come in with now to add. All right, looks like we're just about there. Okay. Cool. Now that was pretty tricky, I would say. That is not the easiest of the steps. In fact, I'd say that's the hardest. Now, our next step for this video is just adding in the neck. So we are gonna go through and you can see we're adding just solid black and then having it fade out near the base. So let's go ahead and we're gonna line the edge. We're giving ourselves a nice crisp border. And we're gonna start by just like filling in on this side. And we want that to be pretty solid all the way down to the edge of our paper. And we're also gonna have a pretty solid layer of black going all the way up, so you can see right here on our neck, it's pretty darn dark all the way through. So let's go in and add that dark value just right underneath. And I'd say it's like dropping down probably to where the chin is to touch the bottom of the paper here. Now we can come in and I'd say it's darker on the edge as well. And then we're just gonna fade this out to the gray. Getting lighter as we work our way towards that triangle. All right, now this is what it should look like before we come in with our blending stump layer. I am gonna clean my blending stump off. We always just wanna check to see how dark it is. Now I'm gonna start by blending out this lightest patch. That looks like it's just about the right value. So now I'm gonna come into my dark patch and make sure that I leave that lighter section in that little triangle there. I don't want to accidentally fill it in with the rest of my dark values. So I'm gonna avoid touching that triangle again. but I want to go along the edge of the face and give myself a nice crisp solid line with my blending stump. Blow away your dust so you can see if you have gone up against those lines all the way. Don't forget the little corners, and don't forget to go all the way to the bottom of your paper here. And then you can go back through, and we're just doing one last little pass to make sure that we've got a nice transition out and a subtle transition. So if you see line work, that means you need to go back through. All right, now one thing to remember is that if you go outside the lines, you can erase the charcoal, which is always a nice thing to know. So if you go outside the edge on your neck like I did, you are welcome to erase that to make it nice and crisp again. All right, well, those were the two things that you were learning in this video. I hope that was helpful, and feel free to re-watch this video if you got a little stumped with some of the difficult steps of the eye. Remember, this is your practice, so take it easy on yourself because you are just learning. This is your first practice. So good job, and let me know if there is anything that I can do to help you as you work through this progress. Don't be afraid to come up and ask questions. All right, thank you so much for watching.